It's hard to keep track of all the ways President Trump has tried to bend, break, or outright ignore the law in just 1 year. I mean, this is a guy who came back to the White House already carrying more indictments, civil judgments, and scandals than most politicians rack up in a lifetime. But this video is not about his first term, or his old cases, or even the stuff that happened before 2025. This is only about what has happened so far in his second term. Just this year. Just 2025. And I'll be honest with you, there's so much of it that even people who follow the news every day have lost track. You've forgotten at least half of it. I probably have too. So in this video, we're going to walk through it, step by step, month by month, and look at everything legal experts, watchdogs, and even some Republicans have called illegal, unconstitutional, or outright corrupt. And just a quick programming note before we start. Some of the things on this list might technically be legal only because the Supreme Court later changed the rules or because Congress hasn't caught up yet. If it was arguably illegal, unconstitutional, or blatantly corrupt at the time Trump did it, it's on this list. So buckle up. We're going to start where the chaos really begins, right before he took office again. We begin in January 2025, before the new inauguration. While most presidents-elect spend their time putting together a cabinet, reading briefings, and writing an optimistic speech about unity, Donald Trump did something a little different. He launched a financial empire. Instead of divesting from his businesses or putting his assets into a blind trust to avoid conflicts of interest, he helped birth a shiny new creature. A bundle of patriotic financial products, meme coins, and investment vehicles branded with his name and wrapped in a flag. It was pitched as a way for ordinary Americans to invest in the future of the country. In practice, it was a way for anyone, foreign governments, corporations, billionaires, crypto bros, to put money directly into the pockets of the sitting president while he was making policy decisions that affected them. Lobbyists who used to book ballrooms at the Trump Hotel now had a much easier route. Buy the token. Buy the coin. Buy the branded fund. Watch your investment mysteriously increase in value every time Trump tweets about it. Is that technically bribery? Is it a massive conflict of interest? Is it a giant flashing neon sign that reads, "Corruption here"? You can decide for yourself. But ethics experts were very clear. If this isn't illegal, it's only because the law wasn't written with this level of shamelessness in mind. And that was before he even put his hand on the Bible. Then comes January 20th, Trump's first day back in the Oval Office. Usually, the first day is about symbolism. A few executive orders, some reversals of the previous administration, some photo ops. But Trump didn't just sign a couple of orders. He unleashed an avalanche. In one day, he tried to rewrite whole chunks of the legal system by pen. He signed orders targeting immigration, the civil service, environmental protections, gender policies, and the federal bureaucracy itself. Some of these orders were arguably within his power, but wildly abusive. Others were so far outside his actual authority that constitutional lawyers basically spit their coffee out when they read them. On immigration, he declared a national emergency at the southern border that critics say had more to do with politics than facts. He sent active-duty troops to bolster immigration enforcement in ways that blurred the line between national security and domestic policing. Legal scholars immediately flagged potential violations of long-standing laws that keep the military out of ordinary law enforcement, and warned that if this became normal, those guardrails would effectively disappear. He also revived the dream that many of his advisors have whispered about for years: a federal bureaucracy cleansed of anyone who doesn't show personal loyalty. Through memos and executive orders, he tried to make it easier to fire career civil servants and harder for independent watchdogs to do their jobs. Inspectors general, the people whose entire job is to catch waste, fraud, and abuse, suddenly found themselves on the chopping block. Because nothing says, "We're definitely not doing anything illegal," like firing the exact people whose job is to catch illegal things. And that was still day one. From the beginning, one pattern became very clear. Whenever Trump didn't like a law, a court decision, or a rule that limited his power, he acted like it was optional. Congress passes a law he doesn't like? Ignore it, reinterpret it, or refuse to enforce it. Agencies have rules that protect people from discrimination or corruption. Rewrite them, defund them, or quietly order them not to enforce those rules anymore. Independent institutions inside the executive branch, the people meant to resist political pressure, were pushed out, sidelined, or replaced with loyalists whose main qualification was total obedience. That's not just bad governance. A lot of legal scholars argue that it violates the president's basic constitutional obligation, the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, not just the ones he finds convenient. And if you're thinking, okay, but is that really illegal? That's kind of the point. A lot of the most dangerous things Trump has done in 2025 sit in this gray zone, not clearly permitted, not clearly punished, and often protected by judges who seem more worried about upsetting the president than about enforcing limits on his power. Then there's the third term problem. While all of this was happening, Trump and his allies spent much of 2025 flirting with the idea of him staying in power beyond 2028. Sometimes it came as a joke. Sometimes as a joke, but what if? Sometimes as a kind of trial balloon. He mused publicly about how a lot of people wanted him to serve more than 2 terms. He said he was not joking about the possibility of a 3rd term, and hinted that there might be methods to get around the Constitution. Supporters proposed constitutional amendments tailored specifically to let him, and only him, run again after 2 non-consecutive terms. Conservative media floated legal theories that most constitutional scholars called ridiculous. Is talking about a 3rd term illegal on its own? No. But the point isn't just the words. It's the normalization. You repeat the idea enough times, you get a resolution in Congress. You print some Trump 2028 merch. You sell the fantasy to your base. And suddenly an obviously unconstitutional idea starts to feel like just another political debate. That's how you soften the ground for real abuses. You turn the unthinkable into the barely thinkable, then into controversial, and then one day into, well, some say. That's not just political theater. That's groundwork. Now let's talk about pardons. The pardon power is huge. It's one of the most powerful unilateral tools a president has. And in theory, it exists to correct injustices. Wrongful convictions, excessive sentences, people who have truly turned their lives around. Trump used it as a loyalty program. People who praised him on TV? People who donated? Politicians with corruption convictions? Media allies, political allies, financial allies? One by one, we watched the same pattern. People convicted of serious crimes, fraud, corruption, obstruction, suddenly saw their records wiped clean, not because the facts were wrong, but because they were on the right team. Is the pardon power basically unreviewable? Yes. Does that mean it can't be abused in ways that are fundamentally corrupt? Absolutely not. At some point, when a president is openly signaling that the law doesn't apply to you if you're loyal enough, you're not just stretching constitutional powers, you're attacking the basic idea of equal justice under law. You can't build a functioning democracy when your friends get magic erasers and your enemies get weaponized law enforcement. And that brings us to the weaponization side. In 2025, we've seen Trump push the Justice Department and federal law enforcement closer and closer to becoming tools of personal and political retaliation. Law firms that represented his opponents? Suddenly, they find their government contracts under scrutiny. Former officials who criticized him. They lose security clearances, find themselves under investigation, or become targets of public smear campaigns. Universities, schools, and nonprofits that take positions he doesn't like? He threatens to pull funding, launches investigations, or tries to label them as un-American or corrupt. Is every single one of these actions clearly illegal? Not always. But taken together, the picture is clear. The massive machinery of the federal government, investigators, prosecutors, regulators, grant makers, is being nudged, tilted, or outright shoved in the direction of punishing critics and rewarding loyalists. That's the sort of thing we used to condemn in other countries as authoritarian. Now it's just called Tuesday. Let's move to immigration and borders, where some of the most aggressive and legally questionable actions happened. Trump declared an open-ended emergency at the southern border and used it as justification for sweeping actions. Expanded detentions, multi-state deployments of National Guard units, and pressure on local governments to cooperate, or else. In some cases, legal experts argue that these moves stretched or broke long-standing laws meant to prevent the military from being used in domestic policing and to protect basic due process for migrants and asylum seekers. Critics say due process wasn't just weakened. It was treated as an annoying technicality. Detention without proper hearings, fast-track deportations with minimal review. Policies that seemed designed not just to enforce the law, but to send a message. If you're on the wrong side of this president's priorities, the law will be used against you, not for you. Meanwhile, the administration tried to punish sanctuary cities and jurisdictions by threatening to yank federal funds unless they cooperated exactly as the White House demanded. That puts them on a collision course with the Constitution's spending and separation of powers rules, which say the president doesn't just get to invent new conditions on money that Congress has already allocated. Again, the question isn't just, is it literally illegal on day one? The question is, how many red lines can you cross before the lines stop meaning anything? Now let's talk about the culture war stuff, where law, ideology, and personal grievance all blur together. Throughout 2025, the administration moved aggressively against policies related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and against protections for LGBTQ+ people, especially trans people. Programs and offices dedicated to civil rights, equal opportunity, or anti-discrimination were targeted for defunding, restructuring, or outright elimination. Grants were frozen. Contracts were questioned. Rules were rewritten with vague language about wokeness, ideology, or gender. Some of this might sound like normal partisan policymaking. One side prefers X, the other prefers Y. That's politics. But a lot of what happened went well beyond, "we disagree with your priorities." When the government starts punishing private entities, schools, nonprofits, hospitals, for speech, research, or inclusion policies it doesn't like, when those punishments involve pulling money Congress already approved or restricting rights that courts have recognized, that's not just policy. That's potentially unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination and illegal impoundment of funds. In other words, your tax money gets weaponized to enforce a particular ideology, and anything outside that ideology suddenly finds itself in legal danger. Then there's the information side, how the administration manages what you're allowed to know. Throughout 2025, we've seen fights over records, secrecy, and propaganda ramp up. There have been highly selective declassifications that conveniently helped Trump's narratives while exposing private information of ordinary people. There have been attempts to pressure media organizations, threaten broadcast licenses, and exclude disfavored outlets from access. We've seen efforts to rewrite how federal agencies talk about American history, race, and civil rights, pushing them to downplay the worst parts and lean into a sanitized, heroic narrative. Museums, parks, and educational institutions that tried to continue presenting the full picture faced political pressure or funding threats. Again, taken one by one, each of these might look like a random story in the news cycle. Put together, they're a coordinated pattern. Control the story, control the memory, control the terms of debate. If you can rewrite the past, you can excuse the present. If you can blur the facts, you can blur accountability. Now, let's zoom out and talk about foreign policy and the use of force. One of the scariest themes of 2025 has been how comfortably this administration talks about war, targeted killings, and toughness, without showing the slightest interest in congressional authorization or real legal justification. There have been confrontations at sea, aggressive actions at borders, and hints or threats about military strikes against countries that challenge Trump's agenda. Sometimes these are justified as anti-drug operations, sometimes as anti-terrorism, sometimes as just defending American interests. The problem is that the boundaries between legitimate military action and unlawful uses of force are getting fuzzier and fuzzier. Congress, which is supposed to decide when the country goes to war, is often reduced to watching from the sidelines. Civilian casualties, due process, international law, they're treated as afterthoughts at best, obstacles at worst. And here's the thing. The law doesn't magically enforce itself. If the president orders something that crosses a legal or moral red line, someone has to say no, or sue, or prosecute. If those people have already been sidelined, fired, or intimidated, the law is just words on paper. And all of this is happening in the shadow of one giant, looming question. What happens in 2028? Because everything we've talked about so far, the conflicts of interest, the third-term flirting, the weaponized pardons, the retaliation, the emergency powers, the pressure on elections and voting, is not just about what happened this year. It's about what happens next. When Trump jokes about canceling elections during wartime and then doesn't really walk it back. When his allies float the idea that maybe the 22nd Amendment can be reinterpreted. When political enemies keep finding themselves under investigation while loyalists keep finding themselves magically clear of consequences. You start to see the outline of a strategy. Stay in power as long as possible. If the Constitution gets in the way, treat it like a suggestion. If the law gets in the way, bend it until it cracks. If institutions get in the way, purge them and replace them with people who will say yes. And if anyone asks whether any of this is legal, point at a friendly court decision, call it totally exonerated, and move on to the next boundary. So, after all of that, what can we actually say Trump has done in 2025? He has blurred the line between public office and private profit. He has treated law enforcement as a tool to attack enemies and protect friends. He has normalized the idea that core constitutional limits, two terms, civilian control, free speech, due process, are optional if enough people will clap for you. He has pushed emergency powers, immigration laws, and administrative rules to their breaking point. He has flooded the system with so many controversies, so many legally questionable moves, that it becomes hard to track any single one of them long enough to hold him accountable. Individually, some of these acts might be just unethical. Some might be unconstitutional. Some might be criminal. Some will never see a courtroom because the very institutions that should enforce the law are being hollowed out in real time. But taken together, they tell a simple story. If you are loyal to Trump, the law is a shield. If you oppose him, the law is a weapon. And if the law gets in his way, he'll try to rewrite it, ignore it, or break it, and dare anyone to stop him. So, those are the acts. Those are the power grabs, the abuses, the arguably illegal moves, and the definitely corrupt ones. At least the ones we can fit into a single video. We almost certainly missed some. There are memos we haven't seen yet, decisions buried in footnotes, retaliatory firings that never even made the news. There are cases still in court, orders still being challenged, powers still being tested. And we still have years to go. Here's the thing. Authoritarians don't wake up one morning and suddenly declare, "Surprise, I'm a dictator now." They do it piece by piece. One emergency at a time. One loyalist appointment at a time. One norm shattered. One law bent. One court decision manipulated at a time. And if you're watching this thinking, well, none of this directly affects me yet, so maybe it's fine, I want you to remember one simple truth. By the time it affects you, it's usually too late. So pay attention. Ask questions. Support the people and institutions that are still trying, desperately, to hold the line. Because if this is what 1 year looks like, imagine what 3 more will do to the rule of law. And if you think that sounds dramatic, just remember, a lot of people once said, "He's just joking. He'll never really try that." Look around. Does it still feel like a joke?